Welcome back to the Corner of Story and Game, a podcast where we explore the artistry and craft behind storytelling and game design. Today I'm thrilled to have Dan Felder with us. Dan is the game design director at Sky Castle Studios, known for creating games for the makers of Hero Forge. His impressive career includes roles as lead designer at Riot Games and Electronic Arts, with contributions to titles like Hearthstone and Faeria. Dan also shares his insights through his podcast, The GM's Guide. Today we're going to talk about the power of curiosity. So let's get into it. Dan, thank you for joining me.
Hey, pleasure to be here.
You said something the other day about curiosity and this concept of how curiosity can grab people and pull people and do all kinds of wonderful things. So I had to get you on the show to talk to you about curiosity and how it impacts game design, and that's why I want to talk to you about today.
All right, well, that sounds good to me. I mean, fundamentally, I think it's proving its own premise, right? Because I said something about curiosity and you wanted to learn more, so it motivated you to engage. Use all the game design terms.
That's awfully meta. You are a game designer. But before we dig into it, I do like to set the stage with your origin story. So can you tell me who is Dan? How did you fall in love with gaming? How did you get into game design? Quick little brief tour through your career highlights, how you got to where you are today. Can you give me the background?
Yeah, I'm Dan Felder. I've been a game designer at a lot of different studios, from Riot Games to Blizzard to EA to some indies like Abercrombie Entertainment when I worked on Faeria. I've done freelance consulting. I've worked on, tabletop role-playing games. I've done some board game stuff, and a whole lot of strategy is my main bread and butter. But I do kind of consulting in lots of different genres because I'm a very holistic game designer. I like to really understand what makes a human feel a thing. My background actually came from a weird, disturbing mix of business and theater. So basically, when I grew up, I was very, very interested in just how do you make a human feel a thing. I was fascinated by motivation and teams and how to work together that way. But I was also fascinated by stories and playwriting growing up. I did like theater festivals and similar, and I got like into some young playwriting like contests and put plays on. But it's fascinating, like, what makes a good story from a bad story? What separates that? What is the, like, because it's not just recipes. What, even if you do know recipes and say, hey, putting these two ingredients together makes a good dish, why? What general principle can we extract by understanding that adding salt to something is good? Why is it good? That's what I wanted to really learn about, the underlying mechanisms that make humans feel stuff. And when I was really studying business a bunch, I kind of was really just not enjoying what I was doing. It kind of felt like there was this constant, deeply unsatisfying trying to move things around for very uninteresting social ends, and also uninteresting creative ends. I used to remember going back to, after doing it pretty well, I remember going back to my family for a summer vacation when I was in college and thinking, I used to imagine stuff. Where did that go? And so I thought about it more, and I sort of realized that one of the things that our professors kept telling us, because a lot of kids wanted to get rich going to business school, because of course, and was like, hey, rather than just be greedy, maybe think at least about like what you would do with your life if you were to strike it rich. Like, what would you do with the rest of your life? And so at least try working for that, and maybe try to see if you can find a business or something that lets you do that earlier than when you retire. And I thought about it, and I thought, well, what I love doing is tinkering around with game design and game mechanics and stuff. And I love writing, I love narrative. And I thought, wait, aren't those just like jobs? Like, isn't that just what somebody does? If rather than try to like buy or build a whole company to do all of that when I'm like, an established businessman, why don't I just go do that now and they'll pay me? And yeah, so basically that's sort of how I started thinking about it. And one of the big other elements was, at that time, thankfully, when what helped me sort of realize, get me over the edge for that, was I was helping one of my friends apply to Digipen, and I was helping them with their essay and so on, because I was known as a writer. And we came up with this idea about trying to write why games matter. And we were talking about why they matter to us and thinking about it, and we sort of realized that there was a lot of discussion at the time. It's kind of tempered down now, thankfully. Like, are games good at stories? Are they a legitimate storytelling medium, artistic medium? And we sort of realized, and I still believe this to this day, it shapes my philosophy heavily, that games are not good storytelling mediums. because storytelling is it's like acting is a film a good painting medium. It's fundamentally the wrong question. Stories are not inherently valuable. Stories are come out of culture across every culture in the world. Every society tells stories, which means it's evolutionary. Like different cultures do lots of different things, but things that are deep hardwired into us are narrative and story. We share stories because we want to have experiences beyond our own. We want to gain skills, knowledge beyond our own. And tense situations, high stakes situations are important stories worth sharing knowledge. So for the longest time, we've wanted to go on these adventures and hear about these adventures and share our own adventures. And for the longest time, Homer could go down to people in Athens and say, well, I can't give you an adventure, but I can tell you about Odysseus. And you can vicariously live their experience for them. I can't give you that adventure, but I can let you vicariously experience his. Game developers just say, you want to go on an adventure? And when I sort of realized that games are not storytelling, they're story living. And that blew my mind, and I realized I had to change schools. And from then I've just been clawing my way into the industry.
Very cool. See, a good podcast host can go and look up who you are and what you've done, but you're not going to get that story. That's the story I was looking for.
Of course.
I often ask, because I find a connection between narrative designers and digital designers, and the fact that many of them played and often ran tabletop role-playing games growing up. Was that a shared experience for you as well? Did you play a lot of tabletop growing up?
No. I played a lot of Magic the Gathering and like chess and stuff, but I was not much of a gamer growing up. I was a casual gamer. I played games occasionally, less and less as I started getting like near college age and in college, until I realized that to be games like I thought it was unproductive. So that was weird. Now I actually get mad at myself for not playing more video games, so I can't win. But basically, I did not play D&D growing up. When I got into D&D, once I realized that I wanted to do game design. And so whenever I like to approach any problem, I think, okay, what's the most effective way to approach this problem? What are all different methods? What's the point? I try to design my own learning process or creative process. Like if I was trying to engineer this way to get as much experience as quickly as possible, because I felt like I was pretty behind. I'm coming into games kind of in college and haven't really, like I've done a little bit of programming growing up, not much. I've fiddled around with some stuff. I played games casually, but never was a big console gamer, played most of the famous ones. I really felt like I was coming in late and I wasn't interested from the artistic element side of games rather than inherently being a huge gamer myself. Like I played Magic the Gathering a lot, but that's about it. And so as I was going into that, I started thinking about how do you learn something quickly. Everyone is saying in this industry that you've got to do rapid prototyping. You got to build stuff fast, try it out, and stop. And so I was thinking, okay, well, that sounds like fruit fly science. That sounds like you study genetics because you want rapid iteration. So you study animals with short lifespans and fast reproduction cycles to quickly get a lot of mutations. What is the fastest I can do that? Because I keep reading about these students that have spent 6 months trying to half make a game project, usually abandoning it part way, doesn't get anywhere close to polished enough to get actual much insight out of it. And so that's why all these game colleges are teaching computer science, because you can't teach design because it never gets far enough. And so it's like, how do I skip that? So there's a few things I did, but one of the things I did was I thought, okay, I need to make tabletop games. And more than that, if I want to learn narrative, I've got to be a dungeon master, because I can make 5 hours of narrative content every week and play test it live and get immediate feedback. I actually organized an entire independent study in my college where I did effectively give myself an elective course to just run a D&D campaign for other students and write about, like, here's the narrative principle I'm going to apply. And it was a big experiment in how do I create emotional investment. And I would write about how I proved that I created emotional investment by getting players to take sacrifices for their mechanical sacrifices, lose power, lose abilities, lose strategic objectives for the sake of characters in my story that could not help. And so I kept trying to create situations that would do that and testing out new theories, seeing what worked, and it was incredibly effective. I started applying that to combat design, for encounters, for levels, for dungeons, through like high level narrative as well as moment narrative, just everything I can. And system design, I started working on my own systems, and it was just such a good way to learn, and it was so fun that I just got completely obsessed. So I actually went into tabletop hobbyist design because I recognized it was the best way to learn video game design.
Did a paper come out? Like the idea of using D&D to test narrative and game design is one of I fascinates me. Is there a paper? Is there something that
No. A lot of my like early articles, us rambling on Gama Sutra and stuff, were taken from lessons from that experiment, as well as a lot of other experiments I did. But that was very much an internal, just, hey, this is an elective class that wasn't done with scientific rigor. It couldn't have been submitted to anything. It was just me like saying, so here's what I did. Here's what I thought was going to happen. So basically a normal game studio playtesting process. You run stuff, you write up what happened, you run what you're going to try next, and you get some surveys. Nothing to publish in a magazine, but that wasn't my goal. My goal was to simulate months of digital game development to get high level lessons and just test everything I could.
it's funny what you describe is something that a lot of home DMs do naturally, and probably they don't even think about it, but it's you're constantly paying attention to the response you're getting from your players and what they're looking for, and you responding to that. So a lot of home DMs don't even realize they're applying game design principles. They're
Oh,
learning how to write narrative, even though they're just having fun.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, fundamentally, if you are a homebrew dungeon master, you are just a game designer. That is what's happening. You are more. I consider D&D a lot closer to Unity or Skyrim Creation Kit, like one of those like hell of a modding tools, than I do to like a board game. Because the way that a dungeon master experiences it is they say, "Hey, I can make this adventure. I want to create that. I'll build that in some software." And basically, D&D is just a physics engine. I know the DM's guide says, hey, this isn't a physics engine, but in the way that video games talk about it, it's a physics engine. Like you can plug, most people say, like, hey, you can do anything in D&D. It might not work great, but you can't, but we can at least get it to work at least kind of well. Well, that's what we say about Unity.
Take that, wizards.
Hey, I think it's fantastic. I mean, I don't think you should make every game in Skyrim Creation Kit. But you could certainly make a lot of different games in Skyrim Creation Kit, and some wonderful games have come specifically out of that. Like, I haven't played Forgotten City yet, that's on my list, and I know that started as a mod.
That's cool. That's so cool. That's a whole nother conversation for another podcast for another day. We're here to talk about curiosity. So the whole thing that started this was you were talking about this theory, this idea you have around how if you make a player curious about something, that's all you need to do at the start. They'll start to explore and investigate. And we didn't wander too far down. I wanted to save that for this conversation. So why don't you set that stage for me? What is that theory? What is that idea? Where did it come from? What does it mean?
I've got no idea where it came from. I think it just feels almost self-evident. The main, it might have come from a lot of my background, because I like studying medium outside of game design. So, for example, I try to get as much design, I try to find as many different things that solve similar problems to whatever project I'm working on all the time. So when I was first started to work on retention, I assume this is where I developed this idea from, because I think it was chronologically correlated, was I was trying to think, how to get people to keep playing your game? Early problem in my career, that you've run across, everyone's across at any type of live service game. If you have a buy to play game and you care about people playing more than 2 hours of the Steam and then abandoning it forever, which happens to a shocking number of games, you should care about it too. So like the vast majority of games on Steam are like, that's the reason they said, hey, if you never play more than this amount of time, we can still like refund you, is because that threshold of gamers that actually do that is shockingly low. So people do not play games for very long, even after they buy them. And some games people go in and they, get obsessed with and they play a lot, and that's great. But what makes you hook somebody versus not? There's a lot of things to it, a lot of different elements. This is not all encompassing. But one thing I was looking at is I looked at other mediums, and I was thinking, okay, how do you get somebody to keep reading a book? And what techniques do you use to get someone to keep reading a book? That is extremely low barrier to entry, and it is extremely hard for people to keep reading books. They don't have all these other confusing things. I always look at a genre or medium that is solving my problem that has as few tools as possible, because it's almost like doing a study in pink as a painter. So like, how much can I do with just this one thing? It's like, okay, how much can I do with just this one thing? I look at similar stuff at lots of different genres. It's why if you want to learn progression systems, looking at idle games is a good idea, because they are nothing but progression systems. And even if you hate idle games, if you can make something fun despite there being no gameplay, you can maybe make it better if there is gameplay. So, with all that background, the way that I think about curiosity is, I believe it's the most underrated idea in game design, the most underdiscussed, underutilized, because whenever a player starts the game, We're trying to give them the information they need so that they can have fun. And some amount of that is necessary. But let's talk about the emotional tone. For a second, what makes somebody want to keep going? We only give as much information in stories, if they're done well, as you need to understand the impact and importance of the events that are about to happen. So the moment you understand why the inciting incident of the story matters to the character, that's when you have it happen. That's as little information up front as you need to care about that. And so if you have a movie like Kramer versus Kramer, where the inciting incident is a woman walking out on her husband and child and leaving them there, you don't need much exposition to understand why that would be a big deal in someone's life. So that happens as like the very first scene. Whereas something like Rocky, you have like 40 minutes of having to understand why it's a big deal that this guy's going to fight the heavyweight champion of the world because he's a protagonist of the movie. We expect him to do that. We need to understand what a loser this guy is. And that takes like 40 minutes to really to make us realize, wait, this guy is going to do that? And understand what that's going to matter to his life. So if you think about the emotional tone of the player sitting down right at the start of the game and thinking, they want this, even if they think they don't, to be the best thing they've ever played right at the start. They would really like it if it was the best thing they've ever played. And that's an interesting thing to think about. What do you do? What's the first thing that happens on screen when that happens? Well, if you think about the emotional tone, it should be something that makes them want to keep playing, something that piques their curiosity, makes them want to explore, want to investigate. Curiosity is our mental state of wanting to know more, wanting information. I can't think of anything more useful at the start of a game. So that we have a lot of information. So my first goal is not to give you that information. My goal is to make you want that information and try to earn that information. And the moment that I've done something that makes you curious, and I say, oh, to resolve that curiosity, all you need to do is keep playing, or to go over there, or to look behind that curtain, suddenly people start moving toward the game. And as long as that they're always curious about another thing, and you should resolve it sometimes and reveal what's going on. But before that happens, maybe introduce another thing that they're going to be curious about. So that way there's always a layer of them. They will always want to know more and will always keep playing. And so they also have to feel comfortable and confident that they can overcome the game's challenges. People usually try to solve by blasting you with information. But again, you should only give them enough information and as much tutorials as they need to feel confident that they can play. Like when I introduce people to D&D, I do not start by explaining how combat works. I wait till we get to the first combat encounter to explain how combat works. And so, because that's not what they need to start playing. And then right at the start of any session, I always tell like a new dungeon master, if you are doing, I said tell someone things to video game designers, but I think a lot of people who are dungeon masters can benefit from this, particularly who are asking, what do I do with my first session? If you get players to be curious and tell them and make it clear that it's time to go, that they can take actions to follow that curiosity, and you make them feel confident enough to go do that, they will have a good time. That's what Elden Ring does. Elden Ring is supposed to be this incredibly hard, impossibly dense game that how can it possibly be a mass hit? How can it be a beloved game among so many people? And the reason is because not knowing what to do next is the point of the game. It shows you this shining, glowing tree on the horizon, and you just want to go there.
That's clever. That's clever. When you describe building the curiosity, making them want to play the game before you let them play the game or teach them how to play the game, it reminds me a little bit of like restaurant design. Maybe I've been watching too much of The Bear, but the idea that you want to make them hungry before you put the food in front of them. Like everything from the smells that hits them to the way the lighting is done, everything is done in such a way to make them hungry before you feed them. Mm-hmm. It's kind of the same idea. You want to make them interested and engaged before you actually start teaching them how to play.
Absolutely. And the core idea is, we're going to talk about this in a lot of ways. Like I know, for example, you checked out the beginning of a game that I think does this extremely well, Animal Well. Can you talk about that for a second?
Animal Well. Yeah, well, no, but you recommended I give it a try just because around this idea of curiosity and how the beginning of that game hooks you so quickly. There's so many little things going on to make you curious, from the creature that runs off of the screen that you want to follow to the squirrel, right? It's been a long day. But even how it onboards, like onboarding is always such a big discussion when you're talking with designers about how do you teach someone how to play your game at the same time as not disrupt the narrative or kick them out of the illusion. And that game, it felt like there was no onboarding. You pick up the controller and it's like, okay, I want to try this. What happens if I go over there? Oh, I just learned how to do something. And you just keep following these little hooks of natural curiosity without the game prompting you in really any way.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so what's clever about it is that it does prompt you very heavily, but doesn't feel artificial. It doesn't, and I think one of my favorite examples of this is it's so easy to invoke curiosity in almost everything you do in a game. So for example, one of my favorite things I like to say for this is just even writing a tutorial message. Even if you are doing a tutorial and you are going to force them to learn how to jump and you are going to tell them to jump, like let's get as granular as possible. And a normal tutorial will say, press X to jump. Super simple, super short. No one's gonna skip that because it's only 4 words, and you're gonna quickly press X. You're gonna learn how to jump. It's gonna be okay. No one's gonna say this is an awful tutorial. What's better is if you instead write X with a question mark in a way that looks like a button. A person will go with a question mark, okay, or press X if you don't have the button symbol. Like okay, press X with a question mark. Press it. That makes me jump. You can immediately feel what you write, press X, the question mark. Just imagine that on the screen. That's more inviting. That's enticing. Why is the game telling me that? What might happen? What does happen if I press X? The question mark implies curiosity. It implies something might happen. Why do you think Mario has question blocks? Like, it's because like this is very fundamentally, it makes people who see that instantly wondering what happens when I touch that block. What does that block do? I don't know. I want to find out. It looks golden and it makes a little pleasing feedback when I press it. I got a coin. That was good. So this fundamentally, it can be baked into every level of a game, from tutorials to UI elements, the little sprinkles. If you see something, one of the main reasons that we see something like flash and call our attention to it, we often want to click it because we just naturally want to go explore what that was. And you can really naturally move people around for that. I think a really good example of this in a tabletop game is like if I'm starting a story where a guy, the kind of classic story of D&D is really bad for the most part, where people start in a tavern and somebody comes in with a job for them and says, the dungeon master says, I will, like, hey, I need to hire you to do this thing. Here is a level appropriate amount of gold I'm offering for your level. And if you were to somehow bargain me higher, this might cause balance problems. And I'm worried about that as a dungeon master because I don't know how to sink gold yet. But I'm worried something will break because I'm not an expert game designer yet. And yeah, guys, it's fine to give your guys extra gold. You can always get them to spend it somehow. But anyway, but basically they get worried about that. And so people will say, okay, I guess we do that. And they don't care. They're being given all the if you're going to force me at gunpoint to have a nobleman come in and hire like a group of people in a tavern, what's going to happen is you're going to tell them like, so you're here for this other reason. And then suddenly this figure walks up to you, seems to be wearing like extremely fine cloak, unusually fine for this tavern. I'm already noticing, I'm thinking unusual things provoke curiosity. Like, he's wearing an unusually fine cloak, and his boots look like the type you would normally see on a nobleman. In fact, they're actually maybe not quite, because it seems like someone has taken a rough stone and rubbed at them to make them look more disheveled. And so instantly, the players are going, okay, what the hell is this guy's deal? And he sits near the players, glancing at them, and then sits back, takes to his drink. Someone's going to get up and talk to that guy. Instantly, he's going to get up and talk to that guy. And when he stands up, stands to them, you can see that he has an impression on his cloak where nobles proudly in the city hang their family crest to identify themselves. Except while his cloak has a hole through it, he doesn't have a crest. He seems to have removed it. Now people want to know who this guy's family is because he's hiding it. If he said, I am Lord Torin from the Silverfront House, and my family is important in this land, nobody's listening. Nobody cares what this guy's family's name is. He's a quest giver until he hides his family name. Now players will go on a quest to get that name. Oh, yeah, curiosity is powerful.
There's almost a meme about how DM, usually a newer DM, will have the whole thing that, let's take Tavern, all planned out and everything, and then they got all these characters built, and then they'll throw in a flavor background character in the corner, and they happen to say he's unusual something, or he stands out in some, and then move on. And the players are instantly, nope, we want to go find out all about that guy.
Right. And it's what's so funny is that is exactly what I do when I want someone to pay attention to something.
Right.
Because if I say like, oh, and like you see that there is and you see that one of the guys goes, oh, I should do something interesting because I want players to be interested in my background world. You see like a you see what seems to be a gnome that has a strange set of fairy wings or something. I'm just trying to come up with something like absurd, the thing that a random DM might like throw into the thing, and maybe a result of an alchemical accident. Anyway, the fact I'm trying to sort of shoo that aside actually makes it more enticing, and so that players things will complain that players are derailing the adventure because it's like they're like, I made this huge conveyor belt for them to get on, and just why are they going somewhere else? And it's like, because that's not exciting. It's not the fact that we want to ruin your fun usually. It's the fact that your world is putting up something kind of interesting and not giving it to us. So there's something for us to do. It's something for us to go explore. And the more you do that, the more powerful it can be. And so like going back to Animal Well, which is a wonderful game, I highly recommend everybody check this out. Made by like a single guy over like many years, I believe. So it's great to support it. Utterly fantastic, charming Metroidvania where you don't fight things. So imagine how that affects your environment of exploration. But right from the start, it's a masterful example of curiosity. You like, how do I get them to go right? You see like a squirrel that as you approach notices you and runs away. I want to follow that thing. And then you're like, what are these little red things? I don't know what they do. And then, it creates a little bit of a flash of light and an explosion when I throw it. Okay. And then you run into this like weird ghosty thing that starts screaming at you. And maybe you throw the firework in panic and you see it explode and the thing chases away. You're like, okay. And you're starting to learn stuff. And the world, just by hiding the information from you and not giving it to you directly, it does such a good job of enticing you to explore, discover, and experiment. And it makes that game unbelievably motivational without a single quest like it's ever given you. You find a weird object on the ground that looks like that says like insert disc when you approach. You don't have a disc. Now I want a disc. I don't know why I want a disc, but I definitely want a disc.
100%. Does it say that I play too many of those games when the thing ran across the screen at that first opening, and I'm like, my brain goes, oh, they want me to go right. I better check left for a hidden wall.
No, it just means you have designer brain. That's actually why like I like to point out that if anybody who's a game designer plays Elden Ring, they are usually going to not have a bad time. Except with Dark Souls, they're usually going to have a very easy time, comparatively at least. And it's one reason I think that game is so good, is actually that game does a very good job of controlling player focus as well. In that a lot of the stuff that they do is they try to present something that it's actually good thought for Dungeon Master as well. Is I often try to DM like I'm running Dark Souls, in that my goal is to make things look unnecessarily absurdly scary. Not always. Sometimes we're having fun and we're chilling and players are supposed to feel powerful. But often when I'm running like a dungeon or a fight or something, I try to make things look unnecessarily over the top, terrifying and scary. If we're in like a tomb or you're dealing with a big scary bad, something that's supposed to feel scary and not just like a random, we're just gonna feel cool and get some action pumping, between a story beat, which is also a good thing. Contrasts are good. But basically when I'm running a dungeon, especially if I'm supposed to be running a death trap dungeon, our goal is to make it feel as intimidating as possible, like you could die at any second. This is completely unfair. And then in Dark Souls or Elden Ring, you will see something that looks so impossibly hard that no human could beat this. It really just makes you feel like, how the hell are they? I can't believe they expect me to deal with that. That's ridiculous. These designers are evil. And then like 30 minutes later, you do it. Because it's just they're really good at making it look scary, look intimidating, look impossibly hard. But if you take the right approach, it's usually not bad. It's one reason why they do so many ambushes and try to tempt you running forward, because once you know an ambush is there, you could easily avoid it and feel smart. They don't actually want to get you at the ambush. They want you to get killed somehow and then be able to learn how to beat that challenge, and and then walk through things that used to be difficult. And ambushes are just a really efficient way of doing that makes the DM look faux evil. Like in my death trap dungeons, my players are convinced that they're the scariest thing ever. Whenever a death trap style or scary spooky dungeon in my campaigns, my open world, like I run campaigns that are kind of like MMOs often, where I have like 30 to 40 players and I can join them anytime. Kind of like a West Marches thing is the easiest way to think about it. But basically, whenever they find out Dead by World, they always know it's going to be utterly terrifying, and they say like, we can't go in. We're going to absolutely die. We're all going to die. It's we basically get all these extra levels, and like but somebody wants to go in, so they decide to go in, and they often will bring side characters because of the MMO thing, where they're less important character that shows up, and almost no one ever dies in those dungeons. Like I think I've done like 2 TPKs in my entire DMing career. And both were accidents where it wasn't a scripted one where everybody knew it was scripted. It was like, which is like super rare as well. It was like both were accidents where I was trying to give them an easier fight, but with some interesting gimmick, and they massively overthought it. Yeah. And, but they are convinced that the dungeon is terrifying because like, if James Bond is caught in the death trap, the fig smashes right next to where his head was, it still feels scary. But you don't want to kill James Bond. The story's over. So my goal is to make it look terrifying and make things look frightening. And it's sort of the inversion of curiosity.
It's all about the drama.
Mm-hmm.
I two TPKs in your whole career. 20 years ago, I probably had two TPKs in a night.
Yeah.
But I've mellowed.
Yeah, well, the thing is, like, my philosophy, also kind of like Dark Souls, because again, like, I like to DM like Dark Souls is designed, not the way people think it's designed. My goal is to give people massive telegraphs. If something is going to kill you the moment you touch it, you better believe I'm going to let you know that. Or make it sound terrifying. You can feel an unearthly aura that makes your skin crawl as you approach this thing. If you choose to touch that thing, that's on you. Someone I'm not going to try to gotcha. If the person isn't listening and says, I'm going to go grab the idol, say like, I'll usually make a note, like, as your character is approaching this, your character, like, you are attuned to magic, so you would feel this information. I'll make sure it's a conscious choice. And if they want to make that choice because they think it's interesting, great. That's awesome. If they want to make that choice because they are not understanding the choice, they're just going to feel that afterward, and it's going to be silly. It's going to be dumb. So it's really important that when you ever design, we're kind of wandering over stuff now, but it's really interesting, where say that if you design like a death trap, if we're talking about D&D, or if you're trying to design a puzzle, it's important that for the puzzle, which are also built by curiosity often as well.
There you go.
So there we tied it back. But basically, a good puzzle makes you feel smart. It doesn't demand that you be smart. A good puzzle is fun to solve. It does not mean a hard to solve. You can make the hardest puzzle in the world that isn't very fun to solve, and you made a bad puzzle. So you can make the easiest puzzle in the world, but also isn't fun to solve. It's bad. But if you make a really easy puzzle that people enjoy solving, even only lasts 30 seconds, but they enjoyed that, you made a really good puzzle. And so similar thing with combat designs and combat encounters and tactical strategy games, which are kind of like puzzle generators. Similar things with dungeons and boss encounters. Whenever you're designing these circumstances, you want to make people's opportunities to feel smart, opportunities to feel confident, and motivated to press buttons and see what happens, and be delighted that they did that. You don't want to punish people for that. So a lot of people who are designing a dungeon or designing a combat encounter, designing their first games, want them to be like really hard to show off how smart they are, the designer. That's not the point. That's so easy to do. Like, I could so easily mystify, and it's not impressive, guys. What's impressive is making the player feel like a genius because you have cleverly and carefully layered these things in front of them, the point that they feel smart about solving those things. No great fantasy story is, if you're dealing with a riddle, involves people being stuck on a riddle for the entire book. The riddles you remember in those books are ones where the character got to be smart because they figured out the riddle.
Yeah, 100%. The idea of an item in a D&D campaign or in a game that draws your curiosity and doesn't give you a warning made me think, did you ever play Tomb of Annihilation? Do you ever play that campaign?
I haven't played Tomb of Annihilation. I am very familiar with Tomb of Horrors that it's based off of, but I do know that they certainly toned it down and improved some of the things.
So you're aware of the mask in the wall with the whale in its mouth, and so back in the day as little kids putting our hands into that because you're curious, what is this hole? It's a sphere of annihilation. It destroys your limb. Like, so there was no clue, there was no tip off back in the day, the original module, and that was an excellent example of curiosity being punished and ruining an experience if not handled properly. So I guess where I'm going with this is there a dark side? Can it be used incorrectly in digital game design and in video games?
Oh yeah, I mean, you gave a great example just then, but also like if you're going to tempt somebody into pressing a button to see what happens has to be a fun experience. Like it doesn't have to be a positive experience. It has to be a memorable or fun experience. I think actually a good example in Elden Ring is actually what people often think of as one of the most evil things in the game. When in reality, it's not. In fact, it actually follows the type of thing the way that I would do this if I was building my own level like this, where you can if you go and you open a chest, it's in this one part of the game relatively early. It's a trapped teleport chest that teleports you to this really like mid game area, which to you feels impossibly late game at the time that you get there. Like you're like level 15, and the enemies there are like level 35, and you are teleported into this like dungeony, like this little shack cell thing in the middle of this mine with these horrifying centipede crystal creatures and this like crystalline mine. They are so like hard to kill for anybody of your level right now. They're really above you. You're like, where the hell am I? So you decide, okay, well, I'm just going to teleport back, and then you realize you can't. You're trapped. You have to keep going. You can't teleport back. The game also doesn't have like easy way to save often. So basically you're kind of trapped. You might not have a save for a long time. And the game auto saves different stuff. So you're like trapped there. And then as you are going to explore further, the funny thing is now I'm trying to remember, wait, how does Elden Ring save files work? Just because I mentioned the saving, but I certainly didn't go teleport back. The point is that you cannot undo that mistake easily. Then as you're exploring, you try to fight these things, just get destroyed. And you think this is impossible. But like most things in the game, you can kind of just run past enemies, and they're pretty slow moving, and they're all set up in ways they're not looking in your direction. So if you just kind of sprint down the exit after you stumble around a little bit, you can get out, and then you can find a site of grace, and you can rest there. And then you can look at the map, and you realize you are all the way across this map. This map is actually way, way bigger than you thought it was. It's like you are much further than you thought the edge of the map was, and you're like, where the hell did I do it? Now I can go teleport back to where I was, keep going, or I can explore this really too high level area. And if I do, I'm probably running around. I can pick up some really good treasure. I can avoid combat for a little bit, get stuff that makes me glad I found this trap, and then go back. And that becomes this great, oh my God, what the hell? I never would have thought the game would do something like this experience. That then, it's not actually as bad as you think it is. You get this really cool moment, then you get warped back. Makes you wonder what else might happen every time you open a chest. And then you often get to leave, in fact, with enough loot that I intentionally trigger that trust whenever I do a replay, because I could just instantly warp to a mid-game area, pick up a lot of loot, come back. And it's actually an upside for me. Because I think that's like a good layer of it. But many game designers will be like, ooh, what if the player touches a card and then like draws something for the deck of many things, and then we have this crazy thing happen that blows up their character or blows up the campaign. That's not as fun. I actually did a take on deck of many things that I quite like in one of my evil dungeons. If we're going to be talking about that I think shows how you can take something that's classically considered a press the button, see what happens, bad thing that is memorable but makes for very weird outcomes in campaigns and the deck of many things, and talk about how we can adjust it. So what I did was I had the game say, hey, you found this thing called Deck of Fates, and it was this thing very early in like an evil lich dungeon, and they found it in like a skeleton with a red blindfold on, was holding a box in its hands, cracked open, and there was a deck of cards inside of it. And they analyzed it magically, and they could determine that this seems to be a deck of fates. You can't be 100% sure, but it seems to have that magic. And a deck of fates is a lot like a deck of many things that applies a very powerful permanent buff or debuff to your characters. The debuffs are so difficult to remove that often you have to go see a very high level priest to remove them if you were to get something like that. Instantly making sure players understood it won't make things permanently awful. But the fates are incredibly, likewise, extraordinarily powerful. Like, can be incredible blessings that they're displayed on you if you draw one. And then once you draw a card from the deck, it disappears forever. And so it's like, So somebody decides to draw for it from the group, because always somebody in the group is going to do that, and they get a bad result, and they get a severe negative outcome that isn't going to make the game unfun to play. It's not like they're permanently blind, which means their mischance is bad now. Like, it's something like, something really bad happens to them. Like, if you roll a natural one, you take this huge amount of damage or something in combat, or like, oh, well, this is really bad, and it's almost goes, there's one less bad card in deck now. And so they draw and they get a bad card, and this person goes, well, now the odds are better. They draw and they get a bad card, and what's happened is the lich has removed all the good cards from the deck. And so the players keep self-inflicting it on them, but that feels so funny. And it's also it's what I like to call post-dictable. It's like when they go through it and they realize we saw an evil lich's skeleton, open this thing, draw cards from it. I saw 3 other guys get the bad card and still drew one myself. That's kind of funny. And the lich, the lich pays it off. And then, like, they can eventually get them removed, and the curse is removed. It's not going to be a forever terrible decision. They had a lot of information going in, and, hey, look, I think about this go backwards. Do I feel dumb in retrospect? Yes. And then, like, later in the dungeon, they find the other half of the deck, which is all good cards. So it actually ends up being a positive memory when you take the whole thing together.
Payoff at the end. That's important.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking there about kind of a balance between giving enough information, enough forewarning, enough hints, or post-warning, post-hints, so that it feels whole. Where's the balance? Like, where is that sweet spot with getting enough curiosity? Sorry, go ahead.
It's based on how much negative outcome happens. If I say, stick your hand on a hole, you have no idea what's going to happen. You have no idea good or bad this is going to happen. And you find a pile of gold or a door to a magical realm filled with cool shit, like, that's fine. I don't need to warn that at all. If I say, stick your hand on this hole, the result is that it's going to cut off your arm, I need to make sure that you are okay with this, because fundamentally people misdiagnose satisfaction as fun all the time. So the way that we do play games, most of the time we're making any decisions in games, we're trying to make a decision that leads to positive outcome, or that we consider positive. Some people consider it a funny outcome positive, even if it's bad for their character. Some people are heavily aligned with their character in the D&D setting, and that they want their character's goals are their goals, and when the character accomplishes their goals, that's their win condition, and they treat it that way. Some people in a game are just interested in finding cool stuff and exploratory things. And so if you wake up a monster and now the whole world's different, that's really exciting that we could do that. So that's how positive is debatable. But what you want is a satisfying impact for your efforts. And so if I am making a decision that seems to have every expectation that it would go well, and there's no way to understand that it would go poorly, and my arm gets blown off, I'm going to feel frustrated. And often I will argue with the dungeon master, or I will complain online about the video game that there was no way to see that it could happen. I'm frustrated. If I get an unexpected good thing to happen, then I'm very glad I have that curiosity. So it's mostly the fact is that we want to have agency over our misfortune, but not over our fortune. And so if you tempt people into misfortune, you need to make them excited about that payoff. It needs to be such a compelling, cool, ridiculous idea that it makes them laugh or just marvel at how evil the game designers are. And often you want to make it ultimately not as bad as it seems, because you can get all the impact of, oh my God, I just opened this chest, so I teleported this evil cell, surrounded by these horrible centipede monsters. And ultimately you're able to go back and it's not that big a deal, and that's fine. So that's really the difference, is like, with curiosity, you tempt people to push buttons, but don't make that button blow everything up. You do not want your players to look in front of a big glittering crystal that tingles with magical power, and everybody say, no one touch this, leave this, let's keep going. You want people to be tempted to touch it, and even if they know it might be bad, it's all like, it's something cool is going to happen. And they're going to be glad they touched that thing. You don't want, like, touching this random orb to just roll and kill one of the members of your party instantly and then just move on with your life. That's not satisfying or fun.
As a DM, you love hearing your players say, this is going to suck, but it's going to be so cool.
Yes, absolutely. And it's actually even stronger in many ways, because you have the positive and the negative emotions. And by contrast, we calibrate based on contrasting emotions. So you want to have a frustrating bad moment so that you can so that the next moment burns even brighter. And so when we're talking about curiosity, I highly recommend, though, that, like, this is what's so interesting about curiosity, is that it's not really like anything. It's not really good or bad. It's all based on how you use it. Salt isn't good or bad in a dish. It's all based on the context, how you use it. But curiosity is so effective because it's like the appetizer. It is the pre-event. So I am curious to open this chest. It looks interesting. It's got, like, magic aura on it. Is that going to give me a really cool item? I'm happy, but that, if it's going to teleport me across the world into this cool event, that's cool too. But the important thing was, as a game designer, the moment we care about is not what happens when they open the chest. That's future use problem. Your problem should be first the pre-event of, I make them see this thing that they want to go to. They want to explore. They want to know what happens. So think about your quest hooks. Think about your UI. Think about, like, I think one of my favorite examples is a game that did this with its progression systems. Was there was Persona 5, for example, when they want to tutorialize how to do progressions of your various spirits. There's like a level up system, a sacrifice system to power up other spirits, etc. They first introduced these two characters that do this, and when you're fall asleep, you wake up in a mental prison cell with this weird goblin thing staring at you in your dream, and then you have these two weird little warden children that seem oddly magical, and then the character says some cryptic, ominous stuff that you have to gain power before some terrible ruin comes, which they are not specifying, and it goes like, now these two, I'm like, yeah, what about these weird little kids that seem magical? It's like, I will explain their function at another time. You're about to wake up. And I'm like, suddenly, I am now motivated to get through the game so I can go hear a tutorial. Like, that is very effective. And to make people wonder and then create gameplay or goals to overcome to pay that off. It's a very strong thing, and you should be thinking about it all the time in terms of make your UI glitter. There is a fun little side project I'm doing where I'm basically creating a Pokemon game mixed with, like a Pokemon fan game mixed with Metroidvania world design and some like Dark Souls boss creation and so on, but through the lens of that and lore and similar. It's a fun project, and it's gone very deep, but I use this aggressively. So, for example, there is a right at the start of the game in most Pokemon games, you get offered, here are 3 Pokemon. Do you want Bulbasaur, Charmander, or Squirtle? And you get a little picture, tells you their name, and so on. Like the first thing players find in this game is 3 Pokeballs that are on the ground and blocking their paths. Let's pick one to continue. And when they click one, it says, entrust your fate to the Whimpering Fairy? Just with the question mark. The Whimpering Fairy is not a Pokemon. That's not a Pokemon name. And another one says, entrust your fate to the Emblem of Treachery. Entrust your fate to the Bird of Ill Omen. And depending on which one you click, and they're like, what the hell does this mean? And so sometimes they will save and try all of them and learn. But often they get this moment of, what could this be? And they'll think like, well, I guess I went the one. Oh, it's Mimikyu. Oh, the Bird of Ill Omen. Oh, it's Murkrow. Okay. And so they can move forward on that. And a lot of the stuff and that's just a much more compelling and memorable moment than here's exactly what the choice means. Now, it does not mean that you shouldn't ever tell players what things do before they press the button. That creates what's called confusion, and that's bad. This is actually something that I don't think I fully understand. I can feel it, but I don't have a strong theory about what the difference between confusion and curiosity is, because I can identify 2 different situations, and one of them is so bad that all my playtesting, I always lead with, did you ever feel confused and lost at any time? Confusion is a sense of feeling lost. You don't know why something is happening. And you might not even know how you would begin to figure that out other than Google it, which is not a satisfying moment in a game. Curiosity creates like this pause anticipation of like, I wonder what is going on there, but I don't feel like I don't understand how the game works, or I don't understand what to do next. I understand, ooh, this thing ran off, or I wonder what happens when I press this button. That's positive curiosity. Confusion is what something happens that you don't understand the mechanism of, and it is a very negative emotion for humans, because our brains are basically constantly making guesses to try to keep us alive. So they're saying like, hey, if you drop this ball, it will fall. So don't do that if it's heavy and your foot's below it. So it needs to constantly be predicting what's going to happen. You know, oh, someone's throwing a ball at you. You should step to the side. That's a snap judgment it makes before you even have to consciously react often. And so if you drop a ball and it sprouts wings and flies away, you stop, jaw drops, eyebrows up. It's because your brain is stopping all the function and is trying to suck in maximum sensory information. Mouth open, eyes wide. Because it's trying to take this new data that it didn't expect and try to recalibrate its guessing machine so that it can keep us alive in the future. That's why surprise is such a powerful teaching tool and it's so good at helping the player remember something. So curiosity entices and provokes. It's something that is fundamentally enticing players, whereas confusion makes them feel, uncomfortable. They don't fully know what's happening yet. They're not sure they understand what's going on. So confusion can lead to curiosity, but the moment of feeling confused and lost and not simply wondering if maybe you don't understand how this works or how to move forward, that's bad. Curiosity is when you feel comfortable and confident, but now there's more information that is being dangled in front of you. And so you want to learn more. So that's a very difference. And that's, I think, is even more important difference, I think, as we discussed. Confusion, very bad. People that feel lost and uncomfortable like to quit. Moments of confusion are what make people close games, which is also what you tend to experience is people aggressively tutorialize a lot of information at you. Whereas curiosity makes you want to experiment, explore, and entices you to go further. Like, I wonder what happened. I wonder what happens when I press this button versus I don't know why this thing happened. Wait, was it because I pressed this button?
Right. Or I don't know what to do next. I'm going to hit all the buttons.
Right. And then something happened and I don't know which one did that. Like, or I played a card in a card game, in a digital card game, and I thought I was going to kill a guy, but it didn't. The thing took 2 less damage than before. I don't know why. I don't understand this game. Those are bad moments. And often it's a very much an element of presentation. Like, if something happens, I don't know why it happened, that's confusing. If I then say, that button's glittering. I wonder what happens if I press that. I press it, and then it clicks, and I see a little charge run across it into a machine, and that machine lights up and starts walking. I know exactly why that happened. That is the powerful payoff of the moment of curiosity. And versus if I walk forward and this thing starts blumbering towards me, it never has before. Anytime I've run through this path of the past, I would feel confused and uncomfortable and wonder what else I don't know, but in a negative way. So you can work curiosity to almost everything. It can be, you could do it, we're tying it to rewards. I wonder, one of the reasons that loot boxes and so on are so popular, even in games that are not free to play or have no microtransactions. Loot box like things like boss reward drops are interesting because you're not sure what you're going to get when you kill the boss, and you're curious to find out what that is. If you start getting a lot of trash drops forever, you just lose that curiosity to find out. And you just know, like, man, this is going to be another bad drop, but I might as well do it because I want to get the cool thing and I'm annoyed by this mechanic. Whereas if the game designers do a good job and make you wonder and explore as you're going for rewards what you might get, you don't know what you might get. You get a general idea, but you might get something really special. And maybe there's things you've never even seen before. That's a moment of curiosity. And as you design opening the box and the reward screens that way, don't just jump straight to the reward screen. Try to entice people to be excited to click it and open the thing. Sometimes when I make a game, I'll give players, rather just give players an item directly, where I'll ask them to equip it first. So it's often a key item that I can give to them and just set a toggle, for example, where it's something like, oh, you've now beaten this person, you've got equivalent of the Lens of Truth, and it has infinite magic power, so you don't need to equip it or de-equip it really. But once you equip it to your character, you'll be able to see ghosts from now on or something. So the thing about that is it'd be easy to say, hey, you met this character, I'm going to give you this power, now you can see ghosts. But instead I can give them something called the mysterious lenses. And then if you pick that up and you read it, it says allows the wearer to see impressions of light. What the hell does that mean? You put it on, oh my God, there's ghosts all around me. What does that mean? That's a much better set of moments. It's much more memorable.
Yeah. And you're using curiosity along the way to lead people.
Yeah, exactly.
Brilliant. With all this talk of curiosity, I'm curious, is there a project that you've worked on that was deeply steeped in using curiosity that you're proud of, or that comes to mind that you learned a lot from?
So much of... Honestly, almost all my games I work on do this to some degree, which is funny because they're often very they're strategy games. But I do very much I think one of the best examples of this probably comes from the very best example of this is just that silly side project Pokemon Salt and Shadow, because that was just a thing I made for fun. It didn't but yeah, if you want to see how I think about that stuff, that game is a really good example of it. But it's all about trying to make discovery it's one of the big differences between exploration versus discovery. Many games talk about exploration and they do exploration and it's not very good. What a lot of games really want is moments of discovery. Curiosity into positive discovery is this wonderful alchemical leap. Exploration is, I went there, what is there? Discovery is, I found something worth remembering or telling you about. And so often exploration is go climb trees or something. And many games will create places where there's lots to explore, but not much to discover. And that is where they fall down, where games will be much smaller, but have a lot of things to discover. That's very strong. But if I was going to talk about something more commercial, when I was working on Legends of Runeterra, one of the last things I made before I left was this, it's basically a set of bosses in a card game that was a PvE campaign, and it was supposed to be the first experimentation of extraordinarily hard content in that game, to the point that players would be challenged in ways with levels of characters that they previously thought could beat everything easily. And so it's very experimental, tried a lot of stuff. And one of the things I first did was the moment I was thinking about, like, what's the first thing I want people to see in this game? I wanted to wonder, like, wait, how's this going to work? And so every other adventure in that whole game had been pretty much a linear series of encounters, and this is the first one that instantly branched into three, and then interwove in different ways. And I didn't even care too much about the decision making about that. It was mostly just I want you to see something that you go like, wait, how will this change things? What would this be like to play? Then I did about 30 fights, all of which have little mutators that describe the rules. Like, hey, when the opponent summons a creature, it gets double on this node, it gets double stats, and it can't be blocked by a thing with this thing, that kind of card game stuff. All of them have things like that. When the opponent casts a spell, like they give +2/+2 to the top 3 cards of their deck. Things just mechanics, except a few. One of them was called It That Stares. That's just the name of the card. It That Stares. And its ability description is, it hasn't noticed you yet. On turn 4, it will. Every single time a streamer popped that open, they in their chat were just like, what the hell is that? I don't want to find out. Or maybe I do. Should we go around this time? Should we go find out what this does? And so people just had this really big reaction. And I could have just said, doesn't play cards until turn 4, and that would not have been nearly as powerful. And I also gave the player the information they needed. It hasn't noticed yet. On turn 3 or 4, whatever it was, it changed in balance multiple times, so I forget where it landed. On turn 4, it will. It really makes it clear I should do something before then. It gives you direction, but doesn't fully explain what the heck's going on. And that is great. That's an example of curiosity. When I was creating the Aurelian Soul champion with a lot of special powers, I did something I like to do a lot, which is kind of add some color to descriptions that aren't just mechanical text for this reason, make you wonder what's going on. So there's his final ability said, and people reposted these abilities like crazy. Sure, at first that this had to be a fan creation, and it was like a fake leak, but it was actually from an official stream that we released because it was just playing with the rules in a way that was delightful. The players really liked with this terminology, and it gave them the information they needed, but it made them wonder, how exactly does that work? And so it added more personality. So his ultimate ability was, when I play a champion, like when you play any unit, double their stats. If it's me, it's like the skies descend upon your pathetic enemies. And what this card means is plays the card Skies Descend for free, like from the voice. But it doesn't say cast Skies Descend. It says the skies descend, and a little hyperlink can still check the card, upon your pathetic enemies, adding that little spin there. Makes you really wonder, does this do what I think it does? And then you play it and you find out yes or no, but either way, it's such a powerful ability, you're very happy. And so I give him a lot of personality and stuff. People wonder, like, wait, how exactly does that work? And like he says, like, I graciously bestow a powerful item upon all your created cards. and it's really fit this guy's personality. Is super egotistical in the lore. But people reading that were wondering, wait, how does that work exactly? And I want to find out. And they were always positively surprised because they were very powerful gifts. So you can work this into everything, even rules text. It's supposed to usually be very descriptive. Works better in a video game than a physical game in that case because, it under the hood can work. In a physical game, players have to be able to tell how it fits. But There's other ways you can evoke that.
Such as?
Well, I mean, we'll be here for a long time, but like there's so many ways that you can evoke that sense of wonder and discovery. And like you can jump things from, I mean, I'm touring whether I want to talk about boss design or whether I want to talk about unit design. But one of the things I think is really important, I'm not sure maybe people of your audience like do tabletop gaming specifically, but if we're talking about I like to talk about tabletop game design a lot because it's just a really accessible thing. But one of the things people don't think about as much when they're writing a role-playing system is this has to be fun to read as well as to play. Many people sadly don't seem to think it has to be fun to do either.
I've played those.
Yeah, it's weird how far behind the tabletop industry the tabletop role-playing game industry, not the board game industry, is as a whole behind game design times. And it's really because the game designer can always just blame the players for not playing it right. The game doesn't actually have to stand on its own. So that little crutch makes it, and the fact that you just want to play with friends and you don't want to change systems. That social hook and that psychological safety of learning how to build a fun D&D encounter becomes gameplay in itself because it's actually quite hard compared to other systems. So anyway, within that, one of the things that's really important to understand, and Wizards is actually pretty good at this, is the books are quite fun to read. Especially fifth edition is really good. Fourth edition kind of stumbled because the game played very well, but it read very generic. And so on the table, your character, Ranger and Barbarian, who are both like striker characters, and Rogue would all play quite different, especially after they got a few levels. And it was a very fun system, but had a lot of issues, but that's a whole separate thing. But it's very good. But on the table, when you're reading it, you're just reading like deal 3 weapon damage to guy, deal 4 weapon damage to guy, but they moved 2 spaces after, like you're just reading this series of non-flavorful static things and flavor text, but it was buried near the top of the power instead into the thing, which made it much easier to read and to parse and better for gameplay. For quick reference, 5e doesn't do that. They give you these giant stories of every spell of like, you conjure a thing of fire to shoot things up to this thing, and don't worry about this thing 3 paragraphs later. It's really bad as a reference material during a game, but it's really fun to read. And often you're like wondering, like, if you read some of the starts of these sentences of these powers, are often like, conjure a swarm of phantasmal spirits. And I'm interested wondering, what does that mean? How can I use that? And that builds curiosity in a lot of their spell descriptions and draws you through, makes them fun to read. Many tabletop role-playing game designers obsess with balance to an unhealthy extent. Balance is only important as in of the fact that it accomplishes your design goals. And so many people obsess with balance and with unification. I'm like, oh, just here's all my static powers. Now just reflavor them. And they lose the fact that I don't just want to do average point of damage equal to all my friends. That's not why I choose an ability. When I'm reading an ability, I want it to sound crazy. I want to think of, when I'm reading that ability, cool things I can do with it. I want to think of ways I can get more value than the person's expecting, or other things I could combine with, or make me wonder, ooh, this is a cool feat that makes all my fire stuff better. What other fire stuff's there? I wonder whether that exists. You can evoke a lot of curiosity and move things around that way. And you can also do everything from adventure design through power design. Just think about the player, like of how they're engaging step by step with your content. Think about where their eye is on the page. Think about, what will make them motivated to go check another thing, and see if you can build some curiosity to that. Entice them to read something else, make them want to explore further.
Dude, you're giving me so much to think about, man. There's so much there.
Well, thanks. It's a fun topic. And
it is.
Yeah, it's weird that's not talked about more. I think people just sort of intuit this to a level, and they very much focus on... I think one of the issues is that game designers quickly lose curiosity for their own game. And a lot of game designers work on a very gut level, and they are not constantly watching people play their game. One of the big weapons that I have working on this silly little Pokemon side project game, like I'm a real game designer, but I make a Pokemon fan game, is because that it's so fun, is that we keep making it, thinking it's done, turning it loose in the wild. We've got a Discord server of people, and then various streamers will pick it up again, and they'll play it. And then once they start playing it, random people in their audience will start playing it. And watching how those people engage with this content makes us want to enrich it. And we constantly keep the new player experience that way. We're constantly seeing, like, how does this person who's never seen this before, what are they thinking? And if sometimes, like, a person says, oh, I wonder if this works. Oh, it doesn't. I'm like, okay, well, now it does.
It's gonna.
Yeah, I remember actually this previous week, actually, I had a person who was doing a test of the new piece of content we're doing for that game. And they were saying that the game felt kind of empty because they hadn't gone and talked to this one person that was going to give them an item that was going to unlock a lot of content in this part of the game. And they could have just run in the other 3 directions first, then ended this person last on the 4th direction, unlucky. And to get the information, like, okay, well, now I'm just going to go back. And they kind of didn't naturally, and they like know that they should then go explore and see things that are new. So I made 2 changes. One, made sure that one of the things that this thing interacted with that had changed the world happened on the very same screen they got the item. So the moment they equipped it, instantly saw something like appear that they could interact with now. It's like, things are different now, instantly. But also needed to make sure that they went there first. So what I did was, I was thinking, okay, what should happen? And so, like, someone was pitching me, oh, well, they will just have an NPC go up to them and meet them right away at the start. Make sure they have the item. That way, when they go explore, they'll get to explore that. I'm like, But could we do this? Could we use curiosity instead? Because if I give you this item, it says, here is the thing. Now the world is different. It's like, okay, that's not miraculous. That's not intriguing. That's not surprising. That's not memorable. It's just a quest item at that point. So it was like, and so they put them off to this area, which is what caused them originally, so the player could miss them now, and have a boring time before they found this person, and then go have an interesting time. So that's bad. So what I did was just let me ask you as a designer, what is the simplest? Here's the way I like to slice the question: what is the too simple solution? The solution that is a little bit too simple to work, so obvious, equivalent of how to get past this wall. We smash through the wall. Like, too simple a solution, too low in scope to quite work. Like, what is the too simple version of how do I get somebody to go in a direction? To make sure that they go to this thing first before something else.
You can use a road sign with an arrow pointing in a direction. You can use yellow light, because apparently yellow light makes people go in that direction. Lighting effects, environmental storytelling. I put a trail of blood down the road.
Trail of blood's good because that makes you instantly wonder what left this trail of blood. What am I going to find at the end?
Right.
So that one is like the road sign. Game is telling me where to go. I will maybe go somewhere else. Because like you as a game designer recognize, hey, I could go that direction. Like if a player sees an arrow, they're like, well, I'll go that advances the story. I should go somewhere else first, or I want to be. So curiosity, enticement is different than direction. So one of the things, for example, in the other part of this game, we wanted to teach players this information that you could find hidden items on certain types of rocks. Because if they hadn't found them by a certain part, we give them a long time to figure that out themselves. But at a certain part of the game, these items are kind of important. There's some really important items on these things. We need to make sure you know. But the game has a very unhelpful attitude, and so for important thematic reasons, it shouldn't ever feel like it's hand-holding you or helping you. In fact, like no one in the world should feel like they're helping you. So we need to find a way to give them a lot of important information, but without making it feel like we were on their side. And so we had a sign that read, "Warning: talking to rocks is illegal." And talking is the interaction button, so it's the same one. Do not talk to rocks. And instantly, every player goes to the nearest rock, presses the interaction button, and finds a hidden item. And they're like, oh shit. So that was so much better and so much more memorable. And so with this solution, all I did was like I animated a little question mark, and with a little sign, and like little ting, and like a question mark, and then the player walks down, they see a little ding, then like exclamation point, and then they keep going. And I thought, okay, this will probably work. Very first person I had another dev play it. Didn't know about hadn't seen this act before, and he starts playing it, and that moment he's like, okay, he's talking about stuff, but then he hears a question mark and he goes, what was that? And he goes down, like, wait, there's another, and he just chases like full speed down there. I'm like, well, that worked better than I was expecting. Real one. Yeah, just took like 10 seconds to add those two things, and it just instantly solved like a potential 30 minutes of boredom. Just curiosity. Always think, how can I entice? Like, there's a phrase that it's a little bit blue, but I thought it's a very useful analogy from this great book by Sol Stein, who does this fantastic book called Stein on Writing. It's not Stephen King's On Writing, also a good book. Stein on Writing. It is a brilliant editor who has a fantastic way of explaining what makes a story tick or not. Really worth it. A lot of these techniques can apply directly to narrative game design or just games in general, and it's just a really good book. I recommend it. But one thing he talks about a lot is he talks about curiosity as well. Though he talks about it in different contexts and with a different term, but he talks about how important it is to arouse the interest of the reader. That's where he calls it the game's narrative engine that it turns on. And his example of this, which I quite like, is an opening of a story where he goes, or he's the person's talking to this guy's talking to a couple who's looking at buying a house, and he says so what's your budget range? Like, oh, we're looking at $300,000-$500,000 range. Says, Says, like, any children? Are schools important to you? And he goes, like, oh, we have 2 children, actually. Goes, okay, what are the ages? Oh, it's about 5 to 8. Says, all right, well, I think I have some house in mind that you'd be very interested in. How about Sunday? And the guy goes, sure. No narrative engine so far. Try to determine when the narrative engine turns on. And he goes, all right, well, how about Sunday then? All right. It says, okay, you'll bring the children. Yes. Says, like, Mr. Mulliner was relieved. Children were part of his strategy. Turns on. You're like, what does that mean? I want to know more. And that's why he talks about arouse the reader's interest. And the line that he says is that basically it is important for the writer to respect the pleasure of their partner. and that and the foreplay is important before the events, the main events, and that the unaroused reader is just as useless to the writer as the unaroused male of the species is to reproductions. You can maybe edit that out if you want. Edit
Nope.
pencil.
No, yes, Sam. Nope. So we've gone from talking about food to sex somehow.
Well,
That's curiosity.
how to make humans feel a thing.
Food and sex. Yeah.
This is just brain chemistry here. So, if curiosity is a form of positive anticipation, that is very similar to the way that a lot of story games actually are required to fill gaps that otherwise fall down in motivation. So I wonder I am anticipating what's going to happen when this character finds out this other character. That is, dramatic suspense. And suspense is that idea of that positive or negative anticipation about what's going to happen versus mystery, where you're trying to figure out, but they both are happening different ways. There's also like the motivation of, I wonder what the next conversation is going to be like. Garrus has something new to talk about. I want to hear about that. But also just thinking, Garrus has something new to talk about. Okay, whatever. I maybe will go because I like talking to Garrus. But if you see in a previous scene that Garrus has hidden something in his belt, and the camera lingers on that for a minute, you're like instantly, Garrus, what the fuck was that? You want to talk to that guy immediately. Even like games like Final Fantasy X actually does this. It uses the limitation of the fact that you really aren't expecting in that time in games to be able to talk to anybody you like, and it'll drop some like really crazy, like curiosity provoking thing, like you're dealing with Sin, the giant monster, and then and this strange guy seems to be oddly magical. You're not sure what that's about. Maybe you'll find out more if you keep playing the game. Like he goes to you randomly, goes, "That's your dad," and then he's like, "What?" And you want to go talk to him. And he's like, you better buy potions before we head out. And you're like, no, I want to talk about something else. And it's like, sorry, I don't have a dialogue tree. Maybe keep playing.
So that puts a bow in the conversation around curiosity. But before I let you go, I do like to ask everybody, there's a question that lives at the heart of this podcast. It's like this philosophical thing that I ask everybody, no matter what you do for a living, no matter what part of what industry. The question is, in my opinion, there's a magical space at the intersection of story and game, improv, comic book art, film, all these things where there's a shared language, there's a fellowship. If you agree with me, and not everybody does, but if you do, what's the magical thread that holds that together?
How to make a human feel a thought, or feel a feeling. So fundamentally, we're all humans. I actually have a talk that I like to give at various game studios called Designing for Humans, because I think that fundamentally there's a lot more that unites us than divides us. And we can often talk about this applies to tabletop role-playing games. This applies to video games. This applies to dice games. This applies to... One of my best ideas I've ever come up with was when I was consulting, and I'm annoyed that it wasn't for like a day job, where somebody was asking me about designing a giant virtual reality experience that was tied to this physical attraction in a space, where it's basically you'd play a game that you would last for 30 minutes or 15 minutes, somewhere in that range, as a tourist attraction as a part of a VR thing, basically. And I was helping with that. And that's a pretty weird problem space. And it was with very strange technology, very immersive technology. No one had really, this was 4 years ago. So this was very, very unusual for any sort of game design space. Still is, I would argue. But especially because it was not just a VR headset, it was physical environment. And they were hiring me because they knew I was a game designer. And I was thinking, okay, here's all the things I would normally do to apply to a game. But it doesn't really apply. I know how to make all these games you played for 15 to 1,000 hours. Different games for different targets. Maybe even a few hour heavy narrative games. This is a game you're supposed to not play and come back to over and over again, or for multiple sessions. This is a game you're supposed to play for 15 to 30 minutes and remember for the rest of your life. What is a medium that is similar to that? And I started going through any other things that check those boxes, similar constraints, similar stuff. And I realized Disney World. We're basically dealing with a dark ride here. We're dealing with a, immersive experience that cuts off the outside world and tries to present to you this memorable moment, and is colorful, bright, has maybe light elements of gameplay where sometimes they'll be fake, where it's everybody shout this thing, and sometimes it'll be just they'll actually give a little, you have to decode a thing as you're waiting in line. And so how can we look at what they can do and apply that over here? So design is fundamentally about how you process information. And as humans, even though like lots of people are neurodivergent, even among us, just similar things like optical illusions will work on most people because the way we and there is probably, if anything, more differences about different sensory receptions than certain core cognitive processes that apply to everybody to just simply make decisions. And while there are always, distinctions, we focus on distinctions so much that we kind of lose a track of the idea that there's a lot more unites us than divides us. So that core understanding of how do humans perceive reality on a basic perceptual level, what makes something motivating? What makes something fun? What makes something satisfying? Why is something fun in the first place? What are the different terms for it? What are the different emotional ingredients you can sprinkle in? Anybody who's curious about something, you can tell me as much as you like that mobile gamers are different than tablet gamers, are different than console gamers, are different than tabletop gamers. But if I put a little question mark somewhere and put a little ding sound, people are going to want to check that out because humans are human. So that, I think, is the core intersection, how to make a human feel a thought.
Nice. Beauty. That kind of wraps her up. I do like to open up a little space. Is there anything that you're promoting, you're working on, you want to boost signal? Or conversely, where can people find you online if they want to follow you?
Sure. Yeah, connecting me on LinkedIn works surprisingly well. So as long as just send me a message that I know it's not a random bot. And feel free to say you found me on this podcast, but anything is really fine. I always try to connect with students as well. So if you have any questions about getting into games, especially in this horrible economy, or any other stuff, I can't always make time, but when I can, I do. In terms of stuff I'm promoting, gonna have a book out eventually, but not yet. You can always listen to my old podcasts on tabletop role-playing games, specifically on dungeon mastering if you're interested in. I did one thing called the GM's Guide. Holds up. It holds up okay for the early episodes, and some of them I'm very proud of, like talking about how a dungeon should be an expression of a character that created it. And that's a big philosophy I have about level and dungeon design. That you think about who made this place, and exploring one of my dungeons, for example, I try to make it feel like the scene in the movie where the cops have finally found the serial killer's house. And they're navigating it and seeing all these clues about who he is and what his space looks like. And understanding his character the character of the person who made the dungeon in my claims is key to surviving it. Like understanding the way they think and how you can apply that knowledge. So if environment exploration becomes character exploration. So if that sounds interesting, lots of I've done on my podcast, GM's Guide. Other than that, eventually I'm going to release a book. Look for it. And until then, I will promote 3 books that I always love promoting, and I wish every game designer read because they are crazy effective at saving you years and years of struggle. First one is Celia Hodent's The Gamer's Brain. It's by a great UX researcher and designer. She fantastically breaks down different ideas about how humans brains process information and how to make stuff work. If every designer read that book once, it would be, you get to skip like a whole year of learning. Like it's just unbelievably crazy. If you're interested in getting into game design, read that book, learn it. It's going to go well. If you prefer audiobooks or that book, which is a bit more textbook-y, even though it's extremely well written, but it is dense, just want something entertaining that's still not wildly productive, the books Decisive by Chip Heath and Dan Heath and Switch by Chip Heath and Dan Heath are both unbelievably good about how do humans make decisions and and what causes humans' behaviors to change. 2 things that game designers absolutely need to know, and they are very fun reads.
Okay. Well, that's it, my friend. But I do want to give you the last word as you're heading out the door. Do you have any final words of wisdom for us?
For my last words, I would say, when it comes to creative decisions, and to a certain extent career ones too, don't make a decision just out of fear. It's important to understand that things can go wrong and to prepare for the unknown, but the most important thing is a lot of people will be afraid to make something that they're proud of or that they think matters, because what if other people don't like it? They'll think that something is good and is a smart decision and could go well, and they'll be afraid that it won't, and what will that say about them or their vision? I remember when I first got promoted to lead designer on Legends of Runeterra at Riot Games. Up to that point, I had been strongly advocating, as in every meeting I could, that we needed to go into a direction based on player versus environment content. that that it was a huge future for the industry. I've been saying this for literally many years before I had joined. I said in an interview even, and I was, as you're saying, I can't believe that the leads are not, pushing in this obvious direction. That this is something that is really good. Now, to be clear, a lot of them agreed with me. A lot of them didn't agree with me, and the point ultimately shifted in that direction. So, I have nothing bad to say at all. But it was so obvious to me when I was a senior designer that we should absolutely go in this direction. Then I was put in charge. And suddenly, it was very tempting to not shake everything up. To not say, now that I had the power to move us in this other direction, what if it didn't work? When I wasn't in charge, it was very easy to say, of course this is what they should do. Of course they should take this big risk. Sure, we don't have a bunch of data proving that it's going to work out, but it works on paper. It works in play tests. There's all these other games where we clearly have information. It will totally work. And we should absolutely commit to this giant bet to do this. And then when it's my call, it's scary. And I almost decided when they asked me, so Dan, what do you think we should do? I almost decided to slow walk it. I very much came back, if I just slow walk this and say we should keep experimenting, but ultimately now I think I agree. I've thought about it more. I've learned some more information. I think we should stay the main course, but maybe we should do some more light experiments. I almost made the decision. And then I thought to myself, this thing that I think a lot in my career has served me well, that don't make a decision just out of fear. Thought, is there, if it wasn't for the fear, what would I be doing? And luckily I had that information because it hadn't been my decision for a while. It hadn't been afraid. So now I forced myself to go through with it, and it was wildly successful. So even though I knew all the things I should know, if I had all this fear, and I would have, I think, been very easy to make that wrong decision. And reminding myself not to make a decision just out of fear is very important. It's hard. It'll cloud your judgment. You have to step back and ask yourself that question consciously. Am I doing this? One of my favorite little cartoons, which I apply actually to game production all the time, applies this as well. It's a thing about Christopher Robin taking Winnie the Pooh, or known in that point as Edward Bear, and he's dragging him down the stairs behind him as it goes down. And Winnie the Pooh's head is bumping on the stair every single time. And it says, Winnie the Pooh had never gone downstairs any other way, so he thought this was the only way to go downstairs. And says, sometimes he'd think to himself, there must be a better way to go down the stairs, but then his head would bump on another stair before he could think of it. And that's often a metaphor for being in the middle of a game production problem, and that's with a bad process to the point that you'd have no time to stop and think. But whenever you're making a big emotional decision, consciously ask yourself, am I going down the stairs backwards? Am I making this decision just out of fear?
Well, it's once again time to close up shop and set sail for another plane of existence. But before I shove off, I want to stop and say thank you to Dan for once again sitting down and sharing your insights and wisdom. And to you, dear listener, as always, thank you for taking your seat at the table. Until we meet again, keep creating, sharing, and exploring those worlds and stories. Stay safe, Wanderer. Your chair will be ready by the fire the next time you stop in at the corner of Story and Game.